Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I had always believed that 30 years of marriage would forge an unbreakable bond. But lately, every family gathering and quiet evening at home had become a reminder that something was terribly wrong. It started with small, biting remarks that chipped away at my confidence. A comment about my fraying hair here, a dismissive shrug at my suggestions there. Jocelyn, my wife, had a way of turning even the simplest conversation into an arena for public humiliation. I remember one crisp autumn afternoon when our extended family gathered in our backyard for a celebration. The air was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, yet under that veneer of festivity, I sensed an undercurrent of malice. As the conversation flowed, Jocelyn leaned in close to a cousin and whispered just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Floyd still can't manage a decent conversation without sounding pathetic. The laughter that followed was a cruel, echoing sound that reverberated in my chest. I felt my heart sink, and I stood frozen as the eyes of my family bore into me with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Inside, a storm of doubt and self-loathing raged. I questioned if I was truly failing as a husband and a father. My daughter, Sharon, sat quietly at the edge of the conversation, her eyes downcast, as if she had learned long ago that my silence was a given. I recalled the many evenings spent in a quiet corner of our living room, where Jocelyn would belittle my efforts to fix a broken chair or help with homework, calling them weak attempts at manhood. I remember thinking, is this what I deserve? Must I endure this degradation in silence? But the thought of confrontation was paralyzing. Each insult had become a scar, and I feared that speaking up would only invite further wounds. That evening at the reunion marked the breaking point. As I helped clear the dinner table, Jocelyn made a pointed remark in front of everyone. It's amazing how someone can spend decades and still be so utterly useless. Perhaps I should have done everything myself. The words cut deeper than any knife, and I could hear the sharp intake of breath from my daughter, Sharon. Her silence was not comforting. It was an affirmation of my helplessness. I felt my hands tremble and a hot flush of anger, mixed with humiliation, coursing through me. In that moment, I wondered if enduring this abuse was worth sacrificing my pride and the respect I longed for. My thoughts raced as I stepped back, the weight of years of unspoken hurt finally converging into a single, painful clarity. Should I continue to swallow these barbs in silence? Or was it time to stand up and reclaim the dignity that had been eroded by constant humiliation? As I gazed at my reflection in the window, I saw a man trapped by his own fears, yearning for the strength to break free. That night, as the family dispersed and the darkness swallowed the remnants of the gathering, I lay awake pondering the true cost of a lifetime of neglect and the possibility of a long overdue change. The tension had been simmering for years, but that night, among close friends, finally pushed me over the edge. It was a crisp Saturday evening, and I found myself at a cozy rooftop bar where the city lights danced over our gathering, lending an air of casual celebration that masked the underlying currents of disdain. I had hoped that the familiarity of old friends and the gentle hum of conversation might offer a reprieve from the constant barrage of humiliation at home. But as the night unfolded, every laugh, every clink of a glass seemed to underscore the emptiness of my own existence. Jocelyn, with her trademark blend of charm and cruelty, moved through the crowd like a seasoned performer on a stage, her words laced with subtle barbs aimed at exposing my every flaw. I tried to focus on the conversation around me, but her piercing glances and whispered jibes slowly eroded the small reservoir of self-respect I had managed to cling to. At one point, while discussing plans for an upcoming family vacation, she leaned in with a smirk that chilled me to the bone and remarked, "Floyd, are you sure you can handle all these plans? We wouldn't want you to mix up the dates and ruin the whole trip, would we?" The laughter that followed was not the warm laughter of camaraderie, but a cold chorus of judgment, each note a reminder that I had been nothing more than an afterthought in her eyes. I felt my face grow hot with shame, my mind swirling with a mix of anger and despair as I realized that this public spectacle was a culmination of decades of carefully honed cruelty. The whispers of my own inadequacy grew louder with every passing moment, and I could sense the pity in the eyes of our friends, their glances a silent commentary on my perceived weakness. It was in that moment of unbearable vulnerability that I reached my breaking point. I could no longer endure the relentless tide of humiliation that had defined my life. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the tiled floor, drawing the startled attention of everyone around me. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice echoing over the murmurs of disbelief. The room fell silent, every ear straining to catch the raw determination in my tone. I have spent years swallowing insults and excuses, pretending that my worth is measured by the empty praise you all offer when I'm not being ridiculed. I paused, feeling the weight of every derisive remark, every sneer of condescension. I deserve respect. I deserve to be seen as more than the butt of your jokes. The intensity of my words hung in the air as time itself seemed to pause, and even Jocelyn's smile faltered for a fleeting second. My outburst rippled through the room, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt the stirrings of hope amidst the chaos. The shock in the eyes of my friends was a mirror to the shock in my own heart, a realization that my silence had only given power to those who sought to demean me. Yet even as the tension dissipated into an uneasy quiet, I knew that this was not a moment of triumph, but the beginning of a painful awakening. I realized that my sacrifices, my years of enduring humiliation, had been twisted into a cruel mockery of loyalty and duty. In that heated confrontation, I discovered that the person I had become was not defined by the cruelty of others, but by my own capacity to stand up for myself, even when the odds were stacked against me. As I sat back down, the air heavy with unspoken promises of change, I understood that the road ahead would be long and fraught with uncertainty. But for the first time, I dared to believe that I might reclaim a sliver of the dignity that had been stolen from me. The days following my outburst had left me restless, and I found myself wandering our once familiar home with a growing sense of dread. Every creak of the floorboard and rustle of the curtains whispered secrets I was desperate, yet terrified to uncover. It started with small, nagging suspicions that Jocelyn had grown increasingly secretive, a subtle shift in her routine, hushed phone calls in a language I no longer understood, and the way she brushed off my questions with an icy smile that never reached her eyes. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the study, a room that had once been a haven of shared memories, I stumbled upon a dusty box hidden behind a stack of old magazines. It was an ornate wooden box with delicate carvings that I didn't recall ever seeing before. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I opened it slowly, half expecting to find nothing more than forgotten trinkets. Instead, my eyes fell upon an expensive-looking watch nestled inside, wrapped carefully in soft fabric, and a small velvet pouch containing a few pieces of jewelry. The sight of these items, far too luxurious for a man like me, sent a chill down my spine. I stared at the watch, its gleaming face reflecting my shock, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. My heart pounded as I recalled fleeting conversations and the peculiar way Jocelyn's eyes would dart away whenever the topic of finances arose. Doubt and disbelief merged into a painful realization. These gifts were not meant for me. Could it be that she is planning something I can't comprehend? I murmured to myself, my voice barely audible over the steady beat of my racing heart. The more I examined the box, the more I pieced together a narrative of betrayal that had been hidden in plain sight. Each item was a testament to a life beyond the one I thought we had built together, a life where I was no longer the center of her universe. Anger and sorrow began to churn within me, mixing into a potent cocktail of emotions that left me trembling. I recalled the moments of silent degradation, the subtle remarks that I had dismissed as mere quirks, and realized that they were carefully orchestrated to veil her infidelity. The evidence in my hands was undeniable. Shock turned to resolve as I decided that I could no longer remain a passive observer in the disintegration of our marriage. I needed concrete proof, something that would expose the layers of deception beyond a shadow of a doubt. The watch and jewelry were just the beginning, a physical representation of the secrets Jocelyn had guarded so fiercely. I began to search for more clues, meticulously retracing her steps over the past few months. I monitored her belongings, examined hidden drawers, and quietly recorded every discrepancy. Each piece of evidence, however small, deepened my understanding that her cruelty had not only been emotional neglect, but a calculated prelude to her betrayal. As I gathered the scattered remnants of her lies, I made a promise to myself. I would not act impulsively, but I would compile every shred of proof until the truth was irrefutable. Standing there in the dim light of the study, with the weight of the expensive gift heavy in my hands, I felt a profound mix of grief and determination. I knew that the path ahead would be fraught with pain and difficult choices, yet I also understood that uncovering the full extent of her deception was the only way to reclaim my dignity. With a final, resolute glance at the hidden treasures of her betrayal, I closed the box and tucked it away, my mind already racing with plans to gather every bit of evidence necessary to expose the truth that had long been concealed behind Jocelyn's carefully constructed facade. The shock of discovery slowly transformed into a cold, calculated resolve. In the quiet hours of early morning, when the world outside was still draped in darkness, I began to plot a course of retribution that would expose every hidden lie. I knew that if I allowed my anger to boil over, I risked losing the clarity needed for a measured response. Instead, I turned my focus inward, determined to transform the unbearable pain of betrayal into a weapon against the one who had shattered my life. I started by replacing the expensive gift I had discovered, a symbol of Jocelyn's secret life, with a meticulously crafted replica. Late one night, while she slept soundly in the bedroom, I carefully removed the original watch and jewelry from the secret box and set about replicating their appearance with items I ordered online. The process was delicate, every detail scrutinized to ensure the fake would pass muster without arousing any suspicion. As I worked, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction mingled with a deep, aching sadness. I muttered to myself, "This is just the beginning. Soon, every secret will be laid bare." With the replacement in place, my thoughts turned to gathering further evidence that could not be refuted. I needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jocelyn was planning more than just idle flirtations. My investigation began in earnest, and I started monitoring her routines with a precision I had never thought possible. I secretly installed a discreet GPS tracker on her car, a tiny device hidden beneath the dashboard that would silently record every journey she took. Each day, as I sat in the quiet of the study, I would check the tracker's logs, piecing together a map of clandestine meetings and unexplained detours. The data painted a picture that confirmed my darkest suspicions: long nights, secret rendezvous, and locations that bore no relation to our familiar lives. As the evidence accumulated, so did the weight of anticipation. I spent sleepless nights poring over spreadsheets and maps, each red dot a marker of deception. My inner monologue became a mix of grim determination and calculated planning. Every mile she drives takes her deeper into the web of her own making. I reminded myself, the rhythmic beeping of the tracker serving as a constant reminder of my progress. I even began covertly recording snippets of her phone conversations, ensuring that I had a multi-layered case that would be impossible to dismiss. Yet, in the midst of my meticulous planning, I had to remain careful. One slip-up could mean not only the collapse of my carefully constructed plan, but also my descent back into the pit of despair from which I had so painstakingly risen. I reached out to a trusted friend who had once worked in a field where surveillance and data collection were second nature. Over hushed phone calls in the dead of night, we exchanged details about the best methods to secure my evidence without leaving a trace. "Be sure to encrypt everything," he advised in a low, urgent tone, "and back up your data on a secure server." You need to be one step ahead at all times. His words became the mantra that guided every subsequent decision I made. I adapted his suggestions with a fierce determination, turning my home into a command center where every light flickering on my computer screen symbolized a small victory over the past. As days turned into weeks, I became both the observer and the orchestrator of a grand reveal that was steadily taking shape. I rehearsed scenarios in my head, visions a moment when I would confront Jocelyn with every shred of evidence in hand. The thought of exposing her double life, of showing her how deeply her actions had cut into the fabric of our once shared existence, filled me with an adrenaline-fueled resolve that I had not felt in years. "This is for every time you made me feel small," I whispered to the empty room as I adjusted the settings on my tracker one more time. Every calculated move brought me closer to a moment of reckoning, a moment when I would no longer be a silent sufferer, but a man who reclaimed his dignity. In the quiet solitude of my study, amidst the soft hum of technology and the steady beat of my determined heart, I made a promise to myself. I would not allow the betrayal to define me. Instead, I would harness every painful revelation, every act of deceit, and turn it into the impetus for my liberation. I knew that the coming confrontation would be fraught with emotion and turmoil, but it would also be the catalyst for a future where truth and justice prevailed. As I closed my eyes, I could almost see the moment of exposure, the dramatic unmasking of a woman who had thought herself untouchable. In that vision, I stood tall, resolute, and unyielding, a man who had finally found the strength to take control of his destiny. All the planning, the sleepless nights poring over data, and the bitter taste of betrayal had led me to this fateful evening. I arrived at the upscale restaurant, its warm lighting and hushed ambience belying the storm that raged inside me. My GPS tracker had pinpointed Jocelyn's location, and as I stepped inside, I could already feel my heart pounding with a mix of dread and resolve. I found a quiet spot near the entrance, my eyes scanning the room until I saw her. Jocelyn, seated at a corner table with a man whose presence, though refined and reserved, betrayed a sorrowful intensity. The man, who I recognized from the scattered evidence as the widowed father of Sharon's friend, sat beside her with an air of intimacy that made my blood run cold. They exchanged soft smiles and a small, elegant gift, a single red rose wrapped in delicate paper, that passed between them as if it were a secret only they could share. Every gesture, every whispered laugh between them, confirmed the dark truth I'd come to know. My wife, after 30 years of marriage, was planning a one-night pass with someone who should have been nothing more than a distant acquaintance. I felt the weight of every lie and every moment of humiliation converge into one burning need for justice. Taking a deep breath to steady my trembling resolve, I walked purposefully toward their table. As I neared, time seemed to slow. The ambient noise faded into a heavy silence that foreshadowed the confrontation to come. I pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, my eyes locked on Jocelyn's wide, startled gaze. For a long, silent moment, the restaurant's elegant calm was shattered only by the rapid beating of my heart and the quiet clink of cutlery from distant tables. "Jocelyn," I began, my voice low yet unwavering. "How long have you been deceiving me?" My words cut through the hush of the room like a sharpened blade. The man beside her recoiled, his expression a mixture of shock and regret, while Jocelyn's eyes darted between me and her companion, her composure beginning to crumble. I don't know what you mean, Floyd," she stammered, attempting to regain control of the situation, though her voice betrayed a tremor of panic. "I think you do," I countered steadily. "I know about the secret meetings, the whispered promises, and the hidden plans for a one-night pass with someone who has no business being in our lives." I leaned forward, my gaze never faltering. Every red flag, every dismissive remark, they were all meant to mask your betrayal. And now, here, in front of everyone, I see it laid bare. A murmur of disbelief rippled through nearby diners, and even the waiter paused mid-step with a tray of silverware. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Jocelyn's eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "Floyd, please, let's discuss this privately," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the pressure of her guilt. "No," I said firmly, letting my words hang in the charged air. "This isn't a matter to be whispered in dark corners. I've gathered every piece of evidence. The secret box with the expensive gift, the GPS logs that mapped out your clandestine meetings. Your deception is no longer hidden." I could feel the gravity of my words as they settled around us, an inescapable truth that left no room for excuses. The restaurant fell into an even deeper silence, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of my revelations. Jocelyn's face flushed crimson with a cocktail of shame and fury, while the man beside her looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she murmured, her voice barely audible, as if she were apologizing to a ghost rather than confronting the ruin of her carefully constructed life. "I trusted you, Jocelyn," I said, my voice softening only for a brief moment before hardening again with determination. "I believed in our vows, our shared history, and you repaid that trust with lies and betrayal. I deserve honesty, and I deserve to know that the person I built my life around is not the one I thought she was." With that, I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. The eyes of every diner were on us as I collected the damning evidence that had guided me to this moment, the evidence that would no longer let her hide behind half-truths and feigned remorse. Turning away from the table, I left the restaurant with a heavy heart and a resolute spirit. A man who had finally chosen to reclaim his dignity, even if the cost was the end of a life built on broken promises. After leaving the restaurant, I drove home in a blur of conflicting emotions. Every red light and every quiet street corner became a reminder of the irreversible split that had just occurred. The taste of victory was tainted with sorrow, and as I parked outside our house, the familiar facade of our shared past loomed like a specter over my every step. I hesitated at the door, wondering if entering that space would reopen wounds I was only beginning to stitch together. When I finally pushed the door open, the silence of the empty rooms was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. I moved through the house methodically, each room laden with memories of better times, and now each seemed to echo with the betrayal and hurt that had defined the last several months. I settled in the study, surrounded by remnants of a life we once shared, and let the gravity of the evening sink in. My heart pounded with the weight of regret, not for the confrontation, but for the years I had tolerated humiliation and deceit. The evidence of Jocelyn's betrayal had been overwhelming, and though the confrontation at the restaurant had been cathartic, it also marked the beginning of a long, painful reckoning. I sat down at the desk, staring blankly at the computer screen as I considered the next steps that would redefine everything. The raw aftermath of the revelation was punctuated by the ringing of the front doorbell. I steeled myself and walked to the entryway, unsure if I was ready to face the person who had orchestrated my misery. Jocelyn stood in the doorway, her eyes wild with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Floyd, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly as if she knew that the words were inadequate to mend what was broken. I took a deep breath and replied, "Talk? There's nothing left to discuss, Jocelyn. The truth is laid out before us, and no amount of words can undo the damage." She stepped inside quickly, as if trying to escape the reality of her actions. "You can't do this to us, to our family," she pleaded, her tone shifting between frantic and accusatory. "I've done nothing but wait for you to choose honesty over deception," I said steadily. "For years, I accepted your insults and ignored the signs. Now, I refuse to be a victim any longer." Her eyes flashed with anger as she shot back. "You're leaving, aren't you? Just run away like you always do when things get tough." I shook my head slowly, feeling the finality of my decision solidify. "No, Jocelyn, I'm not running away. I'm walking toward a future where I reclaim my dignity. I'm tired of being gaslight, tired of feeling small. I deserve a life built on truth, not lies." The conversation swirled around me like a storm, her desperate attempts to twist every word, her relentless denial that this was her fault, and my calm, determined rebuttals that left no room for manipulation. As the argument escalated, I could feel the last vestiges of our shared history crumbling beneath the weight of my newfound resolve. The walls that had once sheltered our family now bore silent witness to the unraveling of a marriage defined by betrayal. With every accusation hurled and every tear shed, I realized that this was not just an argument. It was the severing of a bond that had long been poisoned by deceit. When the shouting subsided into a heavy, oppressive silence, I stood in the doorway of our living room, looking down at Jocelyn, whose eyes now held a blend of regret and fury. "I'm done," I said quietly, though the conviction in my voice resonated with the strength I had reclaimed. "I'm leaving this house, this life of lies behind." And with that declaration, I walked out, each step away from our home a step toward a future where the scars of betrayal would slowly give way to the promise of renewal. The air outside was cool and filled with possibility, even as the pain of loss lingered in my chest, a bittersweet reminder that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that set you free. The day after leaving our home marked the beginning of a new and daunting chapter, one where I would reclaim my life through the power of justice. I sat in a star conference room at a reputable law firm, the sterile white walls a far cry from the familiar chaos of my former life. Across from me, my attorney, a steady and resolute presence, reviewed the meticulously gathered evidence. Every document, every GPS log, every recorded conversation formed a damning mosaic of Jocelyn's betrayal. I recalled the countless hours spent poring over hidden files, the quiet determination that fueled my investigation, and now, here I was, ready to present my case. "This evidence is ironclad," my attorney assured me, nodding as he arranged the files on the table. I felt a surge of confidence that had been absent for far too long. Meanwhile, Jocelyn had already begun playing the part of the victim, twisting our long history into a narrative where I was the ungrateful, unreasonable husband. I remembered the dramatic phone call from her, her voice tremulous with feigned distress as she insisted, "Floyd, you're overreacting. Everything's fine. You're just making mountains out of molehills." That call had only deepened my resolve. In the courtroom, the opposing counsel wasted no time trying to paint me as the aggressor, accusing me of provoking unnecessary conflict. But when my attorney presented the undeniable evidence, screenshots of incriminating messages, the secret box containing the expensive gift, and the detailed logs of her clandestine meetings, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The judge's eyes narrowed as the facts unfolded before him, and even Jocelyn's once confident facade began to crack under the weight of incontrovertible proof. During one pivotal session, the opposing counsel slammed a thick folder onto the table and demanded, "Can you explain this series of transactions that clearly indicate secret financial transfers?" I felt my pulse quicken as my attorney responded calmly. "These transactions, along with the GPS records and digital correspondence, unequivocally confirm the infidelity and deception at the heart of this case." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the damning evidence left no room for denial. I sat there, watching Jocelyn's expression shift from feigned innocence to raw desperation, and I realized that every moment of humiliation, every silent tear shed over the years, was now transforming into a source of strength. In private meetings with my attorney, we planned each step of the legal process with military precision. "We need to ensure that every piece of evidence is authenticated and presented in a way that leaves no doubt about her actions," he explained, his voice measured and steady. I nodded, knowing that this legal battle was not just about divorce. It was about reclaiming my dignity and exposing the web of lies that had defined our marriage. The more the case unfolded, the more I could sense that the balance was shifting in my favor. Jocelyn's attempts to portray herself as the aggrieved party fell flat against the weight of factual evidence, and her once commanding presence diminished under the scrutiny of the courtroom. As we wrapped up the day's proceedings, I felt a profound mix of relief and resolve. I knew that the legal battle ahead would be long and arduous. Yet I also understood that each session, each argument, brought me closer to a future where the truth would finally prevail. The courtroom had become a battleground for more than just legal rights. It was a place where I could finally assert my truth and confront the betrayal that had haunted me for decades. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the burden of the past begin to lift, replaced by the steady promise of justice and the possibility of a life rebuilt on honesty and respect. The cold, distant echoes of my past slowly began to fade as I stepped into a new chapter of life, a chapter where I finally reclaimed what was once lost. After the tumultuous legal battles and heart-wrenching departures, I found solace in a modest apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The space was small, yet every corner spoke of new beginnings. I spent the first few days carefully unpacking memories and discarding remnants of the life I no longer wanted to remember. Each box I opened was a silent promise to myself that I was ready to build a future defined by self-respect and healing. In the early mornings, when the soft light of dawn crept through my window, I would sit on a worn-out couch with a steaming mug of coffee and let the stillness of the moment remind me that I was finally free to be me. The sound of birds chirping outside seemed to sing of renewal, and every breath I took was a reminder that life, despite its hardships, always found a way to move forward. As I reconnected with my career, a world I had long set aside, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under layers of betrayal and sorrow. I returned to work with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, determined to excel not just for a paycheck, but as a testament to my resilience. My colleagues noticed the subtle changes, a newfound confidence in my voice, the spark in my eyes that spoke of untold stories of survival and triumph. "Floyd, you've really transformed," one coworker remarked during a busy afternoon meeting. I simply smiled, knowing that every challenge I had overcome was now fueling my ambition. Alongside professional growth, I embraced the role of an independent father with a passion that surprised even me. I made it a priority to spend quality time with my children, exploring local parks, attending their school events, and listening intently as they shared their dreams and fears. Their laughter and innocent questions filled the empty spaces in my heart, mending wounds that had once seemed irreparable. It was in these small moments, a shared ice cream cone on a hot summer day, the quiet reading sessions before bed, that I learned the true meaning of freedom and joy. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but notice the unraveling of Jocelyn's once perfect life. News trickled in about her mounting professional troubles and the isolation that came from choices made in the shadow of betrayal. Former friends distanced themselves, and whispers of scandal and regret followed her every step. I watched from afar, not with schadenfreude, but with a somber understanding that every action has consequences. I recalled one afternoon when a former associate of hers called and said, "I'm sorry, Floyd, but things have really fallen apart for her." Though his words stung, they also serve as a stark reminder that my decision to leave was not only a step toward my own happiness, but also a necessary act of justice for the life I deserved. As the days turned into weeks, I immersed myself in self-care and the pursuit of passions long neglected. I began taking evening walks under the stars, attended workshops on mindfulness and personal growth, and even dabbled in writing, capturing the raw emotions of my journey. Slowly, I learned that healing wasn't a destination, but an ongoing process, a journey of rediscovering who I was and embracing the possibility of a future unburdened by the past. One quiet evening, while I was tucking my daughter into bed, she looked up at me with a bright, trusting smile and said, "Dad, I'm really happy you're here with us now." In that simple moment, I realized that leaving behind the chaos was the best decision I ever made. I had found a renewed sense of purpose, a life where every day was an opportunity to grow, to love, and to live without the chains of betrayal. As I watched the moonlight dance softly on the walls of my new home, I silently vowed to continue moving forward, embracing every new sunrise as a testament to my strength and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The winds of change had finally swept through the remnants of my old life, and as I stood at the threshold of my renewed future, the universe began to deliver its long-awaited justice. I learned that karma, relentless and impartial, was catching up with Jocelyn. It started with the crumbling of her professional empire, a series of missed deadlines, inexplicable financial setbacks, and a mounting wave of public disapproval that left her scrambling to salvage the reputation she once commanded. I recall one evening, scrolling through news feeds on my phone, when I came across a headline that read, "Corporate starfalls, scandal and betrayal shake the firm." The article detailed her mismanagement and hinted at personal indiscretions that had undermined her leadership. The same colleagues who once showered her with praise now whispered behind closed doors, their conversations punctuated by regret and disbelief. Meanwhile, the man who had once been her accomplice, the widowed father with whom she planned a secret rendezvous, had vanished from her life. One day, a former business partner called to tell me, "I'm sorry, Floyd, but he's left town." I heard he couldn't handle her chaos any longer. His words resonated with a quiet vindication that filled me with a somber sense of relief. It wasn't schadenfreude that I felt, but rather a realization that every deceit has its cost. As Jocelyn's carefully constructed world began to crumble, I too found my life taking on a new brilliance. I had rebuilt my career, established a secure financial footing, and, most importantly, nurtured a home filled with love and integrity. I remember a conversation I had with a longtime friend over coffee, where he remarked, "Floyd, you've not only survived the storm, you've learned to dance in the rain." His words encapsulated the journey I had undertaken. I no longer sought revenge for its own sake. Instead, I embraced the satisfaction of knowing that justice was not delivered by my hand alone, but by the natural consequences of choices made. My mind often wandered back to the painful days of betrayal, yet each memory was now tempered by the strength I had forged in their wake. In quiet moments, I would sit on the porch of my modest home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, and reflect on the path that had brought me here. I have reclaimed my dignity, I whispered to the gentle breeze, a statement not of arrogance, but of acceptance. I realized that the true measure of success was not in the downfall of those who wronged me, but in my own ability to rise above the pain. Every setback Jocelyn faced, every crumbling piece of her former life, reinforced my resolve to live authentically and honor the sacrifices that had led me to this moment. I felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons learned and the resilience discovered within me. Though the scars of betrayal might never fully fade, they become the foundation upon which I built a life of honesty, courage, and peace. As I closed my eyes each night, I no longer dwelled on the past. Instead, I embraced the promise of a future where justice was served not by vengeance, but by the relentless pursuit of truth and integrity. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.